All right, your live audio.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. So we'll call the capital planning meeting to order at 7:30. This is a rare event of an in-person meeting of the capital planning committee. So you guys are really getting to see a rare, it's like Haley's comment, once every so many years we meet live. But it's such an important project that we wanted to make sure we did this in person. We also have a recording going so others can listen in. I know there's been a lot of discussions about the school projects. And certainly our committee's been informed of progress, and we've sat in on various meetings over the past year or so. But since it is getting to a place where there is, sort of a live proposal that will go in front of the town, probably in the fall, we felt as a committee now we're sort of officially in the loop, and we wanted to begin to get information so that we can assess the project as part of our process. And just for everybody's kind of information, the capital planning committee's kind of role in all this is we're sort of an advisor to the select board and the finance committee, where we prioritize the various capital items that come in front of the town from highest to lowest priority based on a set of criteria that we've established over the past several years. Obviously, school building is different than a fire truck or a police car or other things that we often look at. So, but a lot of the same standards are going to apply in terms of how we assess this sort of thing. So maybe just quick introductions, just since we've got a lot of folks here. So I'm John Barry. I'm the chair of the committee. Go around.
I'm Jim McCaffrey, member of the capital planning committee.
Mike Kaczynski, I'm the town administrator.
Pete Jermaine, I'm a member of the capital planning committee.
Bob Marini, superintendent of schools.
Jeff D'Amico, managing director with the Vertex Company, your owner's project manager.
Chris Blesson, principal at Tappe Architects.
Mike Quinlan, senior project manager, Vertex.
Eric Rubin, project manager at Vertex.
Diane Germain, school building committee. And I bring apologies from our chair, Mr. Nichols, who's off being a planning board chair today.
Yep.
Thank you for filling in.
John Lure, capital planning, as well as chair of Mills Finance Committee.
Wayne Clocko, Capital Planning Committee.
Sean Powers, Capital Planning Committee and School Committee as well.
Greg Schultz, capital planning committee and select board.
All right. So with the instructions, so Diane, you're gonna kick us off?
Well, you took half of my presentation
Sure.
by introducing everybody. We're here to give you the final submission information of what we've given to MSBC. Sorry. Anyway, our project manager, Jeff D'Amico, he's not a project manager anymore. He's worked with us on the police station and fire station, Clyde Brown. In between, his company was bought by Vertex. And also Chris Blesson from Tappe this is his second engagement with us. He did Clyde Brown, as did Jeff. And I have Mr. Cohen and Eric Rubin, part of the project management staff here. Anyway, are you ready to go, Jeff?
Yeah,
You
I
are.
was just getting that going in the background for the technology stuff was settled while you were doing it.
Okay. I'll turn it over.
And maybe Jeff, definitely go through your presentation, but I think one thing that this committee, we've talked a little bit about is we're I think really interested in the comparing the proposal to what it's gonna cost to run the building, with repairs over the next 10+ years, because I know some of that's in here. So that that's gonna be one of the things that we'll, be using as an assessment criteria. If it's gonna cost us X millions to just keep this thing going, in a not as thorough way versus the Y million, I think that's certainly an area of focus that we.
Yeah, it's great context and, it's where the committee had to start, right, in order to decide, do you renovate, do you replace, do you do an ad reno, do you do new, what are we working with? And so, the design team did do a deep dive on that. We have some of that to talk to you about tonight. I did not include the last year and a half worth of back and forth, right? I have kind of the proposed solution and then that ultimate 10-year capital plan, because ultimately when the voters voted, it's an up or down vote for the overall project. And if it votes down, that 10-year capital plan kicks in because that is the cost of not moving the project forward.
Yeah, perfect.
So, with that, I'll jump into it. So, Diane did the introductions. Overview here is really just, we're gonna go over the agenda and I'll give you a brief, history, but, we're gonna recap existing conditions deficiencies. The options analysis, really just from a high level, and, then Bob will talk about the ed programming, that led to the option that was selected. Chris will then walk you through the option itself, and then I'll, circle back with MSBA, potential funding reimbursement as well as cost. And then just a couple of bullets on next steps and schedule. So the slide that's in front of the screen here, this is just history. We don't need to review it all, but in order to get to this stage, the town's been working for a very long time. Facilities assessment committees in 2014 and 2020, various repairs and replacement costs and outline capital plans. In 2021, they submitted to the state, and that took various gate checks to then make it through various invitation processes. The MSBA is a needs-based program, so they determined that of the 100 applicants they get every year, 2 years you guys were the most needy of the applicants out there, so you get invited into the overall process. It's about 15 to 19 towns get invited in a year of about 120 to 130 applicants. You go through the various steps there of getting your feasibility money appropriated, hiring your consultant team, and starting an evaluation process. So the project team started in 2023 in the summer, and been working for the past almost 2 years on this project. With the culmination of the preferred preliminary design options, it was in April, and so that was really the long list of options and whittled it down. What we're gonna talk about here is kind of from that point forward, so that was just a little bit of history there. Chris is gonna walk you through the existing conditions and the why now, and then I'll pick back up.
Thanks, Jeff. So the building, when we started, we did a existing conditions analysis. We went through and measured a lot of things, looked at all the systems, had all the engineers do a pretty deep dive on the condition of these systems. The HVAC, roof, all the things on the screen, plumbing. We sort of did that deep analysis so we could understand where you are today, and that actually ended up coming full circle for us when we dove deeper into the 10-year maintenance plan, so that we could understand how to propose what your track would be for the next 10 years, just to keep it running, as you had said before. One of the big findings is that most of the systems are really at or near their end of their, we keep saying useful life, and I think that needs some context around it. And useful means you could probably keep them going on a Band-Aid status, but you don't know when they're gonna actually fail on you. And you don't want to be in a position, I would suggest, you don't want to be in a position as a town or a school that you have a major system fail and have to figure out what to do with your students during the sort of fixing stage. And so we think a lot of these systems are at that point where you got to start to worry about the end of their life happening in a time that's not exactly convenient for you. The spaces are underutilized, and that projects out into why you got into the program as well, that you have underutilized, or sorry, undersized, not utilized.
Overutilized.
Overutilized, undersized. The undersized, that's part of why the SOI got you into the program too, so that the MSBA can participate in helping you right-size the building, right-size the spaces for safety standards. You'll see us reference that in some of the options. And then just kind of arriving at the fact that it is an old building. It's got decent bones, but you've got a lot of leaks. The windows leak. We showed a slide at one community forum that shows active drips and things all over the building in various locations. And so we got to take care of a lot of things. And you're at a good moment to kind of understand all of that. These are some of the documents that were produced for the existing conditions review. And again, sort of pretty deep dive on all of that stuff, the roof, everything. We walked around, got a lot of, we popped some ceiling tiles so we could understand some of those things. We did find some things that are really old, so old that engineers couldn't identify what they were. So we recognized that they weren't working, but it's like some really interesting relics inside the building. So it's you've done well for what you've had for the existence of the building, but it is time to give it a real refresh in whatever we do. So
And all this is up on the website too, because the public always wants to know. So every time we do a submission to the state, the one we did in April has been uploaded there, and the one we did last week has also been uploaded there.
Can we just mention sort of when it was built originally and then, I mean, it's very old, of course, we are sitting in a 100-year-old building right now, so.
Yeah.
It's 50 years old, I can't remember what it was, 60, 70 years old. It can be.
Nineteen sixties, I believe.
So it's pretty old.
The new wing is from 1966.
The new one is from 66.
The first wing was 60, new addition in 66.
Okay, so,
That's the new old building.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a renovation in the late nineties,
Yes.
around 2000, but you know, the useful life of the roof and the mechanical systems tend to be 25 years, which is again where you're at now. Which is why some of those systems are starting to get to the edge of that lifespan.
Windows, roofs, things like that. You also don't have much insulation, which doesn't show up in a picture because you can't, it's hard to take a picture of that, but the building isn't super well insulated, and that's one of the factors that contributes to ongoing operations as well. And you can correct some of these things and help ongoing financial management of a building when you get a high performance building, doing more stuff for you efficiently. These are just some pictures of some of the systems if you haven't been in the school in a while. You know, outdated fire alarm systems, you know, all the things, pneumatic controls for HVAC. And in the bottom sort of right center is a view of one of the science rooms, and that is a very, very old emergency safety feature for a science lab that, yeah. These are the leaky windows that I talked about before. You kind of can find these all over the place. This isn't in one specific location, but there are some offenders that are worse than others. One notable aspect, and I think Bob would say his office can deal with it, but maybe the rest of the building can't. But we were in a meeting in Bob's office and literally swatting bees in the middle of the meeting because there's ways these things can get into the building right now. And so this slide is talking about really an MSBA comparison of square footages. And so the way we like to describe this is the state MSBA kind of has a standard that you use for size of classrooms. And the red blocks are classrooms that when you compare side by side with what the state would like to see in a complete new build versus what you have right now, the red ones are all undersized spaces compared to the MSBA's template. The green ones are oversized, and then the yellows are, in that range of about what the MSBA would expect. And so the majority of the building is indeed undersized as compared to the MSBA template standards. And we'll kind of talk you a little bit through that maybe in a minute when we talk about the actual preferred option. But, the MSBA was willing to work with the town, which was good news for you, on the renovation side of it and how we can deploy the square footages to work best for you, but not also force you to completely tear down every single wall just to make something fit the size. So we had to do some analysis and make them comfortable with safety and quota students per classroom and things. And I think that's being reviewed now at the state level. But this is a diagram that shows how it performs graphically.
We'll get into it when we get to the demo and phasing section of it, but the addition of the building was kind of at the end here on the left side of the L shape, if you will. And that has some of the smaller classrooms overall. So the vertical bar coming off the cap in the gym, there's a lot more room to, build those into current standards versus the kind of end of the wing. And so that was one of the reasons leading to that being the portion of the building that was being demolished in the preferred option when we get to that portion of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 10-year capital plan and the request that's come out of this committee that was filtered down to us from Diane and others. So the school building committee and the school committee, both tasked the project with taking a deeper dive, right? So we have done the first leg of this MSBA feasibility study kind of wrapped up in April last year. And, that showed a bunch of options, and there was a large price tag associated with that and still is. So we kind of paused on the project. We said, we've looked at the existing conditions that Chris and his team had already done. But let's take a deeper dive and really try and figure out what can we stretch. And as we figure out what can we stretch, you know, if we span that over a 10-year life cycle installation of capital planning, can we do that and avoid the code triggers? Because code triggers then trigger full compliance in the overall project. And so that's the first exercise we did before we then moved back into studying options. And so Chris and his team spent the summer kind of digging around the building, expanding on where that could go. What it ultimately came down to is essentially year 8 on a 10-year plan, you're gonna hit that milestone where you really have to update things that are past their useful life, that are imminently going to fail before you start to trigger your code upgrades. And so this next slide here is kind of a graphical representation. So Chris and his team first took a pass at what they thought it was. We then met with the facilities department with John Engler to determine, you know, he knows the building better than anybody. Where are the real needs in the project? And so we kind of shifted around some of the stuff from 2026 to 2028 and 2030, you know, really only moving it in 2-year cycles to try and find out what's the most needy. As you saw from the videos online, and as Chris talked about, you know, water is actively coming in the building when we have rain. So the roof and the window replacement, basically to stop the damage and the decay, is the most pressing issue here. And so we want to make sure we do that right away. But HVAC systems with unit ventilators are starting to fail one by one. So in this first chunk of 2026, we would assume that, you know, if the project didn't move forward, you would need to immediately replace the roof, the windows, some section of HVAC just to keep the building up and running. A couple years later, you know, your electrical equipment is going to reach the end of its life, so replacing, you know, primary and secondary and emergency power systems and the wiring associated with that to bring it up to current codes. By the time you get to year 6, your gym air handling unit and some of the other admin spaces and exhaust systems have got to beyond their life. So those are all kind of easier, smaller, digestible numbers. But when we get to year 8, we start to pick up some of the additional plumbing. So acid waste systems, plumbing fixtures, backflow preventers, and your boiler replacement. So again, we've taken those 1999 additions and really stretched that boiler as far as we think we can get it. So, you know, getting 30+ years out of those systems, and then kind of picking up the balance of the classroom unit vents. That's where you hit your line at your beyond 30% of the overall value of the building, and that will trigger code upgrades. What the next chunk is ends up being a large $20 million number in year 10, when you're really hitting all those elements that really need to be addressed. And so that's the ADA accessibility upgrades, you know, control booth wiring, locker room upgrades, signage also goes with ADA, the hardware, doors, hardware needs to be changed out. Your fire alarm is already old, and that's about as far as you can stretch it. Outlets will change, receptacles can change, and then once you start removing all these things, you've got to replace the ceiling because you've got to access all these elements in order to put it in. BDA is the bi-directional antenna, so it's a fireman's radio. Lightning protection, again, these are code triggers. Once you start to do these things, you need to make all these upgrades. So over the course of the 10 years here, you know, this is about, including soft costs, which we can talk about what's in soft costs. It's about $60 million worth of work. And so you could avoid a good chunk of it for the first 8 years. But again, at that 8-year mark, you're triggering that final $20 million of that $60 million number. You've kind of hit that threshold and need to do those replacements.
And is it fair to guess that any one of those jobs could uncover another kind of catastrophic problem?
Absolutely. I mean, these are desk exercises of walking your building and saying, you know, this is fine, but as you go to touch something and it crumbles.
Yeah.
And, you know, in your fingers, literally, which would happen on many renovation projects, especially where there's water damage. Because water is the worst type of damage. You can't see where it goes, right? It lands on a beam and travels, and the next thing you know, you're a corroded structural beam that you didn't see until you had to move some stuff out of the way. So really stopping the water damage is your absolute priority in year 1.
Jeff. Is it possible to take those, the 60 million, the 40, the 20, and break it down into those various bullet points in each segment in like today's dollars?
Yes.
And just to get an understanding of, explaining that to the town and what that means from a replacement cost.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so we've done that to a certain level, and it's, you know, there's lots of assumptions and qualifications in there, but we can certainly make that in the publishable, digestible, you know, to the public.
Good.
I think that's gonna be necessary. This, you know, we're under no fool's errand that this is going to be a monumental task. to bring to town meeting and ultimately get approved, right? So in order to do that, this has to be very thoroughly explained to the public in ways, this graphic is kind of easier to digest. Originally I had a list. And that just gets harder to go through, but you're trying to make it in ways that kind of group it together. There are elements that you could get more economy of scale, more plumbing fixtures, and they go together with more HVAC, or maybe you just want to do the just-in-time approach, which this strives to do, but there are ways to kind of stretch and pull in that.
Well, I think the other benefit of just having it itemized, even if it's roughly, is, every one of them is gonna be more than $1 million, right?
Yeah.
And so every one of those is gonna be a debt exclusion of some sort. Like, we can't handle any of that with free cash, right? So you're talking about, I don't know how many things on this list. 50 jobs on this list, that's 50 votes from the town to go fix them all. It's like, it's untenable.
You could,
right?
it's an override together though, like, so that 2026 would be one override for all of those bullets.
There'll be an override a year, every other year for the next 10 years.
Right, because you're gonna go for the design, year one, and then year two, it's the construction, and then next year design, and then next year.
Right,
construction.
and when one doesn't pass in 2030 or whatever, like, the whole thing falls
You
apart.
can't go to step two for,
Right, right.
to step one.
I'd like to follow up on what John was saying, and that is, if I understand it, there are limits also as to how much you put in before you trigger having to meet codes. And if I'm not mistaken, it's around 30% of the value. If the value is around $30 million, that says we can put in 30% approximately every 3 years. That's $9 million. What we need to understand here is if you look at 2026, 2028, one of these, are we at any point going to exceed that 30% so that we end up the tripwire earlier than anticipated? Because the roof, for example, might be more. I'm not saying.
Absolutely.
So I think that's important. If we're right up against it, the odds are on that we're going to exceed it, at which point suddenly we've hit the tripwire 2, 3, 4, 5 years early.
That red line comes a lot quicker than.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my concern is not that it's wrong. That's not the point, but we need to lay that out because as I calculate it, that says approximately $27 million is all we can spend, if I'm calculating that correctly, before we tripped it anyway, no matter what. So therein is the concern. Where do we trip it and what's really realistic? And it can't, I don't think it's gonna be out there.
Yeah, and the point is you don't know, it's a variable, right? You could trip it at any point, and that's.
And
the
the
assessed
assessed value changes on a regular basis too, so this is a projection based on today.
Right.
But obviously, things change year to year. And how much you put in, and it's a rolling 3-year period.
Right, that's what I was gonna get to. It's not just that year. You have to have, they look at the previous spend for the previous 3 years.
Right.
So phase one is high, phase two has to be significantly lower, because that's only 2 years
Right.
later. Then phase three can go higher. Yeah, so.
But I'm just saying, we ought to have that laid out, because let's go basically worst case. My concern is we're gonna find things we didn't anticipate. That's all I'm suggesting.
I'm not even sure that's worst case. I think,
No,
I think that's likely.
It's the reality of every renovation.
If
You
you
always
tear the
find
roof
something.
off, you're gonna find all sorts of stuff that you're like, oh boy, right?
Especially with, again, the water damage.
And I'd like to just throw in an idea. I mean, avoiding at all costs, bringing up the code, to me, is a compromise with the safety and security of the building. I mean, I know you don't want to do it if you don't have to. But if you find yourself in a situation where 2 years down the road, we feel kind of where the electrical code really drives us to fix the whole thing, we shouldn't necessarily say, I mean, this could all accelerate based upon individual decisions made from a strategy point of view as you go.
There's a political thing of that too, but we're not trying to avoid ADA accessibility as an
Correct.
example. And sometimes you may have a student that moves in district and triggers individual upgrades. That happens in many towns where you have to designate rooms and a pathway for them to get to the cap and whatever the case may be to accommodate them. So there are things that happen along the way that you can't control.
And I think that's the reason that the committee, advocated for the renovation. Because this was not, and you're on that committee too, Jim. So this is not a tenable path really with the LD
It's
unknown.
just one of the options.
Yeah.
It's not our preferred option.
Right.
But it's,
you need to see this, because people are asking, why can't we
Yeah, why
just
don't we
rent
just-
it?
And I think this makes a very compelling
Exactly.
case for why the other one was selected.
So that's the whole point.
Yeah.
This has to be laid out.
Yeah.
So Jeff,
Yeah, so, couple of things is we really
This
took,
is lean.
we took a hard look at, you know, the bare, like, hopefully the bare minimum, but the numbers. We did a full lengthy presentation on this whole 10-year plan. You're getting the Cliff's Notes
Yeah.
version here, but, it's in the meetings for the building committee somewhere, but we can make that available in a better handout form. But each of these categories has, a very specific estimated scope of work with it.
Yeah.
And we assumed in there that there's contingencies and stuff like that, so we're trying to grab some level of unknowns and
Yeah,
say, we're not building that scope of work right up to the 30% and hoping for the best, right?
Yeah.
It's like we've got to build in some unknowns there. That's just wise planning, but one of the things that we constantly told is like when you do these kinds of work over time, someone will come in and try to address a lighting system or a fire protection system, and with a 10-year plan, likely you'll see contractors come in and try to do that. They'll do it in place, they'll do it over time, and you might end up with a ceiling that has different colored tiles or like whatever we can find to mix and match. And then when you get to the very end, we may say, okay, now go in and make everything look homogeneous.
Put in new ones.
But for a while, you're living in a sort of piecemeal condition that is stitching, patchwork and stuff like that. Versus some of the actual full-on renovation options where when you really turn it over to a full project, a big project that includes everything, contractors are just saying, it's not worth my time to pull one ceiling down, do the, like, as you pull little T's out and like try to get a pipe in there and then you have to reassemble it the way it came out. They're just like, I'm pulling the whole ceiling down and gonna replace it new. And so that's kind of the baked in upcharge when you get to these larger scales of work. But when you're not doing the material upcharge, you've got a labor upcharge for the time it takes to like carefully remove, set aside, reinstall. It's inefficiencies. And so these 10-year plans end up creating a lot of inefficiency.
Yeah.
Which we've tried to also bake into the cost models. We can't do it perfectly, but we're trying to show you a real condition there, and then, you know.
I'd like to also comment that I think you have to tell me, I assume you can't use the whole building for students during the time that you're doing it. There's a portion of it maybe, I don't know, but not the whole building. So that means you're going to have students in temporary facilities, bungalows, whatever you want to call them, over this entire 10-year period. So that's another disruptive influence. One can argue, is there a cost associated with it? But there's certainly an issue associated with not just the rental of the facilities, but to the students and the teaching and the staff and everything that goes with it. So I just think we need to take that into consideration in the way you present it.
It's a real cost that doesn't show up in a dollar symbol somewhere, but it does affect the students. The renovation project that is basically the 10-year roll up into one project includes modulars, but one of the inefficiencies here is, say, take the classroom unit vent option, for example. Contractors are going room by room, probably after hours, and trying to accomplish this in a way, or doing the summer slammer approach where you take a big scope of work and try to accomplish as much as you can in the summer. But there's no way they can get some of these scopes all done during a summer break. And so, so you might have the event where you have a staging trailer with materials in it, and every night the second shift crew shows up and does a room and then get it ready and then move. And then you move room by room by room over time, and that's painful for everybody. I mean, that's
Premium associated with overtime.
Right.
yeah. So
I didn't mean to belabor it. I just.
They're all good
these
points.
are talking points that you have to consider. It's not all dollar costs that you have to fill. So.
Wayne, you had a question?
Yeah, so, the very first item there, the roof replacement. How much is that? What's your thought about that?
So it's about $4 million, like in the backup with all the details.
And how does that relate to the energy code?
So,
So energy code, we have to replace energy, envelope systems. We have to replace them when we touch them. So we're assuming the roof will be brought fully up to, the full depth insulation with new roofing material. I believe we also brought into that some calculus for the, solar that's on the roof now and the effect that that would have on your agreements that you have in place. There's a buyout there, I think, if you don't go to full time. And so we're trying to factor in those that we know, but the roof will be brought up to code on the insulation. So with the windows, but the interesting thing there is that if you pull the window out, we put the window back in at an energy efficient window, which is likely a triple glazed type of scenario. But we're not gonna open up the walls and insulate the walls because we're not doing that work, right? So that's one level of energy code that we don't have to touch because we're not opening the walls up. We just have to patch the things that we actually touch. And so.
Are you ever in the 4A proposal, are you ever touching the rest of the envelope? Are you ever touching the walls?
So the 4A assumes that we're gonna be kind of going more deep in all of that, so the addition is fully code, everything's energy efficient.
So the entire envelope will meet the current energy code?
Yeah.
All right, and so,
Maybe I get to, just to that point, do you have a sense of the reduced energy costs per year?
We haven't calculated that yet, yeah.
we're not, in the final four, we're not reskinning the whole building.
Not skinning it, but
So
on the
what-
inside.
But at one point, we looked at early on, taking the brick down and putting the brick back up and putting in insulation and what that would look like, and, you know, the costs start to spiral, you know, and that leads you to new construction, of course, like, you know, so then we took a deeper dive of what can we salvage, what makes sense. You know, the unit vendors also obviously make a hole when you remove that, you know, you've got to do that. So it's still to be determined the full extent of how much insulation we can get in those outside walls, you know, won't be the same level as a new build. Because if you're doing it on the inside, you're just taking program space, and we're trying to balance, you know, not going 6 inches into every classroom. Yeah, so that isn't still an open item.
so the very first year, if we don't do this, would be somewhere an override in the $4 million range, just for that, just for that.
Too.
And
The whole first section there is approximately 10 million.
Yeah.
Based on our projected costs right now,
Which is too
Okay.
high.
for those 4 bullet items.
right, and so and it's the assessed value of the building, is that right? That's the
30 million and change.
33.
the last one I had is 27 million,
Just the building,
right?
close.
Yeah, the building. So where do you get past $27 million? Where do you get past the actual value of the building?
Does the value go up when you stick $10 million of repairs on it?
I mean, the reality is you can get the building reassessed today.
Just
I
asking.
mean, you know, in other towns do that. You can, you know, take a fair value of what the building is and, you know, probably hasn't. Most towns never update it because you're not paying taxes on it, so there's really no reason. But you can't replace that building for $30 million. That's, as you're hearing tonight, that's not a reality.
If only.
Again, move
Just
up.
to clarify.
Really going down this.
This may be a question, Mike, does that Mike, does that assessed value affect the insurance cost? Like, what we have to pay for insurance on the thing?
That's a great question. I'd have to check our insurance value on the building. We can do that.
It's probably a replacement value, not a set value.
Yes, yeah.
We did look at reassessing it, and we got a cost to do it.
Like,
Yeah.
It's been more than 5 years since it's been changed.
your policy has agreed value and all of your buildings are blanketed, so it's
Yes.
the total value of all the properties.
It's over 100 million, our blanket, so it would cover it.
Right.
But it'd be interesting to see what the insurance has.
Wouldn't cover it if we have a project on my friend.
Yeah, no, we'll have to adjust that. Our insurance will go up a little bit after the project.
Okay.
And-
Sorry.
And how much of this have you thought about would be potentially reimbursable through the MSBA?
So to go this route, you'd obviously, you know, either it's not successful at the town meeting vote, or you exit out of the program that you're currently in, and they have a program called Accelerator Repairs, which would cover the roof and the windows. Those are the only elements that are currently in that program. It used to be boilers. Right now, they're on a pilot program looking for air source heat pumps. And so that boiler replacement is on hold as they test run a couple of these air source heat projects. So that would be the only elements that would be reimbursable from that program, because to go forward with a renovation, and I know I'm kind of skipping ahead to, we can come back to this too, but I know it's really crucial to your conversation. We talked about the renovations. And the state want to stay in the program that you're in, they need to make sure you're responding to all the needs you said you had that made you the most needy project, right?
Right.
So capacity was one of them, that you know today, like we built Clyde Brown for 515 kids, and how many are in there now?
617.
Right, and that's 4 years after we opened it, or 6 years after we opened it, so it's, the kids are coming, they're already in the pipeline, they're coming to the next school we're talking about, so. You know, if this project's not successful, you know, even with this 10-year plan, you still gotta find a place to house kids, cause you have, what, 2 or 3 classrooms that are over 27 at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff, you started down a path of saying the state, because people parse every word that is said. You said the state will reimburse for the accelerated repair program. That's not 100% reimbursement, is it?
No, it's a similar, like.
Right, just
yeah.
say it, because people are gonna parse every word. Is it a 30%, 40%?
Yeah, it's that
So
range
the
of-
state will not pay for us to do our roof and windows. When you say that it's a state reimbursed program, they'll reimburse a percentage of it, just like with new.
Yeah, so theoretically, and we will clearly message that you would exit the program you're in,
Yeah.
reapply to that program, that also has hundreds of applicants every
Yeah.
year.
Hmm.
And if they pay for that,
Yeah.
and then you came back, say 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Yeah.
To do a project, they're gonna tax you on the money they already gave you, so they'll deduct that from the next project funding they give you, because you've taken it offline before you got the full use out of those investments they shared with you.
And
So
those
like,
are real important points that people
like I
are
think
missing.
Tri-County might have had that where they had done a boiler
They did.
replacement a few years back.
Mm.
And now that they're replacing the whole school, whatever they got for the boiler is taking off the top of the new reimbursement they're getting from the state.
So if we were to apply for,
At the end of 25 years. We talked about it on this project because but the money you got last time for this project was in 99, so it's just outside that 25-year window, so you and the state both got full value of all the money that was invested in 1999.
so,
That's why this isn't our preferred option.
so if we asked today for contribution from the MSBA for the roof, when would we likely have an answer, as to whether or not they were on board?
2 years.
2 years?
Because you'd have to exit the program you're in now, you'd have to explain why you're exiting, that you're shutting it down. You'd like to shift over to this program. Once a year, they batch through all the projects, so it's whatever, the application is usually in April for the following year, right? So, you submit about a year before you get invited. And then, once you're invited, you then follow a similar path here on a very condensed schedule of what's the size of the project, can the town fund it and get the reimbursement from the state, and then the town has to vote it. So instead of a 5-year capital project, it's a 2-year process, essentially.
All right, so, we're gonna consider this in November, so it would be 2 years from then before we know whether or not they would.
Yeah, it's a year and a half.
Well,
It-
but
If it
as
failed
a-
in
as a-
November,
yeah,
then we
exactly.
would-
Well, we might not get picked. We might get picked for that.
No,
If
program.
it failed in November, you would theoretically apply in April.
Yeah.
Find out later on in the year, and then if you were selected, to your point, so
And then-
April would be the application time if this fails.
And then we would go out for scope and bid and
Right.
all of that, so it's,
They would assign you a designer and an OPM from a stable of people, you'd have a team to then put that out there and come up with
So it
estimates.
sounds like you got a 10% chance of getting a 30% reimbursement. Like if you got 100 towns and they only pick 10, right? And they're gonna give you 30 cents in the dollar.
Right.
like, your odds are not good of
But
getting
you also
anything.
deferred it for so many years that you've created that much more damage to the facility.
Yeah.
Have created that many more problems to be addressed in the future.
You have unknown risk in
Yeah,
those 3 years.
That's right, so, and that's assuming best case, I mean, it may get accepted, but maybe 5 years down the road or 6 years, so.
We'd have to go with a Clyde Brown blue top roof.
Right.
Yeah, I think we
Still have
should
to talk about-
just be very
We save all the
transparent
stars.
that that's a,
There are pieces
gamble
still on the town
that
field.
you may or may not ever get any money from that
Right.
program. We know
Right.
we have money coming from the
Right.
existing program. But
But to me, the key here is being able to spend money the way they're considering staying under the trigger for code compliance, even though there may be circumstances where you can't or don't want to do that, but still, in most favorable situation for the town fiscally would be to stay under that 30% trigger in order to get all this work done, assuming that it's all approved. Otherwise, if you don't, then you buy it all at once, and then you're asking for a major renovation for what? Energy, life safety, ADA, what else?
Everything.
Structure,
Seismic.
That's right, yeah.
seismic,
The snow load, the way things are calculated now are more conservative in some ways, depending on.
Volcanoes?
So.
No?
you just had an earthquake.
Yeah, but I said volcano, not earthquake.
The other thing is that if you don't even know what the building code, I mean, those of you guys and everyone in this table have been involved in building projects before, the codes keep changing, right? And it's not getting easier and the requirements are getting more intense. And each time it builds on the other, right? Stretch energy code, and now LEED is up, and then net zero ready, and all these things are coming. Like a lot of towns around you are starting to vote these things in, independent of projects, now realizing that they've signed their own death certificate that every project that comes after us has to have these extra stringent things. And so, it's a challenge that's out there. And so that's a separate parallel track. Like your town could put forth a ballot initiative to make you carbon neutral by 2035, the way some other towns are doing. And if that gets voted in, that changes everything on the board here. You now can't put a gas fire boiler in. Like I was talking last night, and I was at a police station meeting or fire station meeting about replacing that. That town voted it in, the specialized stretch energy code. They can't put fossil fuels in their fire station. Even though it's a 24/7 emergency operating facility, it has to go all electric because of the way that town voted it. And so that's a challenge, that as you start to think about
This
these
is a
simple
really
projects.
important point, so, because the stretch code is on the agenda someplace in the not too distant future. to
Right,
be-
citizens
to be
petitions
put
can bring those forward
right?
at town meeting.
So it's not gonna get on there before November, but it's out there as something that would be.
Pick a date that's 25 years after this building is built.
So I know we're.
Because then everything's in its useful life.
All these what if scenarios and doomsday, in my opinion, but, so if the option wasn't selected, we went down this first part here in terms of replacing, and the tripwire of all the code comes faster, then the override amount is much more. And potentially, if that were to fail at any given time, what does the school, without meeting all those codes, happen then? Like worst case scenario, like does the school have to close down and we have to merge students into Clyde Brown, or?
No, they're not, they won't.
Or is it
You'll
just
get
more of a
you'll get
violation?
grandfather, and they're not gonna, unless there's a environmental concern or some kind of like,
Okay,
something's gonna fall
Okay.
down, they're not
Okay.
gonna kick you out.
I see.
But,
It's just gonna
but
get
you
worse
just
and
get-
worse and worse.
you just get
Yeah.
pinned in a, like, we can't actually do anything, like, we can't do a
I'm with you.
$1 million project without doing a $21 million
Yeah, I'm
project.
with you, okay,
you can't replace in kind, you have to
Right.
bring everything up
yeah,
to code, and that might be a different scope.
yeah, gotcha.
But this thing is, this is an approach. It's not a plan.
Right.
It's an approach with 4 or 5 or 6 decision points along the way. There's no guarantee that the town will support the first one or the third one. It's really very speculative. I think it's responsible to know what you're really gonna have to do to keep this building up and running for the students. But I think we're talking about it like it's a project. It isn't. It's 6 or 7 projects with 6 or 7 votes and variables and this and that and the other. So what we're gonna consider is a project. A little bit down the road, is that correct?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably a good segue, because we can talk more about the 10 year, because I know that is pertinent to your conversation, but I do wanna just kind of get.
Yeah,
Now, we had Tetra Tech. That was an approach, which we didn't follow because we didn't have the money. This is the same thing. This is not a practical outcome in my
You
view.
know, because the building committee understood that, you know, this conversation was gonna happen, we went all the way back, we looked at the 10 year plan, and then we started to say, you know, how do we develop a ladder of options, right? That look at all these different variations, and so the building committee and the design team and OPM looked at a ladder of options that had 3 renovation only options and 3 ad renos, with the addition was, it kept increasing in size, and then a new construction. So you had 7 options that ultimately ran the gamut of addressing a lot of these existing deficiencies, both from the existing building deficiency, from an ed programming, and from the space constraints. And each of these rungs of the ladder, you addressed more elements, but it came with a trade-off cost or an opportunity cost. Ultimately, the school building committee and the school committee, and afterwards the select board, came to the conclusion that option AR4A met the best needs of Millis. And so that's really what we're here to focus on tonight, to answer all your questions related to cost as well. And so this is just kind of graphical representation of that ladder of options where we looked at renovation only. Now, R1 was that 10-year plan, and then you collapse it all into one project. But, you know, that ended up being about $10 million more than when it's over the 10 years, because at that point, you're also starting to wanted to have a good finished product. So as Chris alluded to, you may have ceiling tiles, one color on this side, different floor plan on this side versus the floor on that. You know, that was actually spending another $10 million, just kind of stitching it all together. So that is the difference between the 10-year and going into R1. R2 takes that same R1 and then starts to renovate the science labs to, you know, knock down a few walls and make a few of them bigger. R3 kind of takes it a little further and addresses some other elements in the gymnasium too, such as the bleachers, but still staying within the confines of the building, but does not gain you any net new space. And in fact, you kind of lose space when you try and increase some of those science rooms and other spaces. You lose some of those ancillary support spaces. AR5 was a science wing addition. AR6 was a gym addition with renovated gym into science rooms. AR4A is what we're calling the middle school addition, which is essentially separating it, the school with all the common spaces in the middle. And then new construction 1 kind of built on the track in field today, and then flip-flopping them obviously came with the highest cost and program. These are some of the criteria that the committee established as we looked at it. You know, do these options meet the ed program? How do they grade out? What is the relative costs? You know, schedule impact, disruption in education, disruption of fields, sustainability, swing space, parking, permitting, et cetera. I'll note that, you know, none of these options are looking to be fully sustainable. You know, it'll meet LEED silver, which is the MSBA's floor, as a prerequisite. They've changed some of the reimbursements now to be more net zero ready projects. Your committee chose not to take those extra couple of $1 million in capital improvements, such as geothermal. So this does not assume that you go that far in these options. And so that's why the costs kind of land where they are. So with that, I'm gonna let Bob take a couple of slides and talk about the ed plan, and then Chris will show you the designs, and then we'll get back to cost.
So part of the MSBA process is we were tasked with developing an educational program that kind of describes how we view teaching and learning, and how teaching and learning is conducted in our current facility, and how teaching and learning could be conducted in an updated facility. And the educational program, the educational plan was informed by district core values and beliefs about learning, vision of a graduate in those public schools. And then we had a number of visioning session with a consultant that we partnered with through Tab A, where we had teachers, parents, and other stakeholders meeting last year to look at what we wanted from our facility to support teaching and learning. What aspects of teaching and learning are most important to us, and how does the current building help or hinder that, and how would an updated facility support that? And so that plan was approved, about a year ago in March of '24. The visioning groups that we, met with last, spring, came up with a series of priorities from educational, architectural to community priorities. And the blue items are where our current building really struggles to meet these priorities. So student-centered learning and real-world learning, teaming and collaboration, distinct middle and high school spaces. Those are very difficult, that, distinct middle and high school does not exist in the current building. They're right on top of each other. We have on the second floor, some middle school classrooms are right next to high school classrooms. It's not like there's necessarily a problem with, high school kids shaking down middle school kids for lunch money. We don't have that problem. I don't want that out there. But certainly having they're two distinct schools with two distinct cultures, and the current building really doesn't support that. And so at both levels, both the high school level and the middle school level, the building doesn't support some of the things that we really believe are critical to learning in the 21st century. Again, looking at the blue and the architecture priorities, flexible learning environments, we don't have that. Everything, we have double-barreled corridors. Every room looks the same. Every room looks like the room you were in when you were in middle school or junior high school or high school. We don't have a lot of flexibility. We don't have collaborative spaces. We don't have spaces that were strategically planned for special education service, English language learner services. A lot of those small group and co-op services are conducted in rooms that were formerly storage areas, no windows, just kind of haphazard throughout the building. We don't have rooms for large group meetings or small group meetings. Large group outside of our auditorium, which is, in my mind, the showpiece of the building. But outside of that, to get kids together in groups larger than classroom size is very difficult. The support services, like I said, are haphazard throughout the building. It's not, embedded right in the building. The middle school educational plan talked about the importance of the middle school philosophy, which is an awful lot about, the holistic learning of the student, which includes social emotional learning as well as academic learning. So, middle school, the preferred option, AR4A, supports the idea of learning neighborhoods in the middle school at grade level teams, with those adjacencies of special education and support services and English learner services, strategically embedded within those learning neighborhoods. Spaces where, we can have the middle school gradual release of independence. Places that are kind of open, but the teacher can still keep an eye on the students to make sure they're, acting appropriately and getting ready to move on to the next step in their development. Again, special ed spaces and English learner spaces wouldn't be, haphazard closets here or there. They'd be embedded right into those neighborhoods. The structure would have flexible classrooms where maybe we could, remove a wall, have two classes together. It would have other spaces where kids can collaborate, can work together on projects, can do some engineering, design, thinking and prototyping. Right now, if you went over to the middle high school, you'd see some of that happening in the hallways and things like that. That's not ideal, not optimum, but that's what the current structure allows. And over at the high school, You know, the high school philosophy is more academically centered. So we'd have, rooms would be organized by departments, and that would enable, collaboration among students and staff, sharing of materials and those areas. The new AR4A would, create a new gym space that would meet the MIA standards for athletic events. We just had a girls' basketball tournament game, this evening, and the girls won, moving on to the next round. It was packed in there. And when we get to the later rounds, our gym isn't big enough, to support, what the MIA standards are for admission, because the MIA wants to get their money out of the gym too. And then, you know, the small group spaces for kids to collaborate and work together. AR4A would create those spaces that we don't have. And all of these, additions, to the facility would really allow our kids to learn and work in the way that work is done today in the outside world. Teaming, collaboration, all those things. It's very difficult now to do that in our current building. An updated structure would support that, in a much better way. And so when we, as a school administration, looked at it, AR4A was the only, plan outside of a new build that truly met our educational program goals and expectations and beliefs about learning in the 21st century.
All right, so I have a question.
Yes.
Some of those points may resonate with a certain segment of the population. I would tend to think mostly the parents of school-aged children.
Sure.
But we have the vast majority of people here are much older and may have the belief that, you know, at $80 million, what was good enough for me is good enough for little Joey. I want to come back to Chris Bless's comment earlier. What does the MSBA say about square footage per student, size of classrooms? What's required? What will they contribute towards versus what they won't? Considering this option and all of these goals, whether they're aspirational. I guess my question is, are these aspirational or are they required?
The program points?
Yes. The space to do the.
So the MSBA requires early on in the PDP phase, the first phase out of the gate, they require one of the fact-finding conditions that you do is visioning, because it's a recognition that teaching and learning evolves over time. And while the core tenets of math, for instance, I've got a sixth grader and a third grader, and they come home and they're like, "Dad, let's do math." And I'm like, "Okay, here's the way you do it." And they're like, "That's not the way we do it." And I'm like, it's the same answer, but they're teaching things that it evolves, right? And so, and I think it's a response to 21st century skills. Or here talk about that a lot, that like old buildings, can good teachers do a lot in old buildings? Yes, I think they can. But can good buildings elevate good teachers? Yeah, they can, right? And so I think the response here is that the MSBA wants you to do this visioning process to set out a series of goals that helps underline the rationale educationally for why you're doing things. And then you back that up with a space summary and a SOI that comes before the whole process even starts. The SOI is a statement of interest. And the statement of interest is primarily outlining the deficiencies, both some educational, but a lot physical in the building. And so you've got these two converging paths that arrive at a solution that's working in harmony to solve educational and physical needs. So
I'd add that one of the things, the reason the MSBA does things sometimes that they do is because they recognize that each town is different and delivers education different. And they're not looking to tell you how to educate your students. What they're trying to do is drag out of you what's unique to Millis and then make sure the solution is supportive of that.
So they define some of the core programs, so like the classrooms, number of special education spaces, obviously CAF and gym and things like that. But then there's the grossing factor, which is your bathrooms, your back of house, custodial, your hallways, your stairs. But there's a percentage in there, it's a 1.5 multiplier, because they know each town is a little bit unique. You choose how you kind of sculpt your building to respond to that. So they don't dictate and say you have to have this many collaborative spaces. How do you guys deliver collaboration? So it's a question posed back to your educators.
Is there a study, piece, presentation, whatever from them that can be conveyed to the public? I totally agree. I get what Edward's saying. It'd be great to say, this is what Massachusetts is trying to create for a vision. This is why Bob is stating it. This is what we're trying to do. Just trying to look for a little bit more resources.
Yeah, I mean, the state does have their educational vision.
Okay.
Certainly our ed plan aligns with that.
Yeah.
But there is, Jeff and Chris and Mike mentioned, there are unique aspects to Millis that,
Yeah.
We feel is very important. We believe as a small district, one of the things we can do better than just about any district around is personalized education. And we believe that the collaborative spaces, the spaces where we're giving the kids a little more responsibility, but still having eyes on them, are important to that part of it. And I live in North Attleboro, and we're going through a building project as well at the high school. And what you just said, Wayne, is what someone, a friend of mine over dinner last week said, hey, their test scores are good, the school, like, they're doing all right. Why do we need a new, $100 million building? And it's not, it's not the same as when we were in school. If you looked at, some of the pictures at the Clyde Brown of the old school days, those historical, it's awesome. All those kids kind of look the same. You look in a classroom today, they don't all look the same. We have a lot of kids with, students with disabilities who, back when I was in school, that some students wouldn't be in that classroom with me. They're there now. We have, English learner students who, are coming into our schools. It's our fastest growing population in the Millis Public Schools. And these kids need supports and, services, and our current building does not support those kind of things. They're in a room that was a break room in the library. So there's things that we have to do now in schools that weren't done back when we were in school.
And Wayne, when you started your comment, you mentioned, why should we do this versus $80 million? I think that's the underlying question. I hear that all the time. I think you'll find as we get further on that this is actually at or less than $80 million because of the MSBA contribution. So this, to meet all of the things that Bob described, is going to cost us no more than just putting lipstick on a pig. So that's what really resonated again when we were going through looking at this. And if we don't get the MSBA funding, I will be the first person out there saying, let's do the $80 million renovation. But if we can get the state to pay 40% to get us this for $80 million, I don't think there's an argument to be made not to do it.
So I'm Robin, I'm the school committee chair. I'm new to the school building committee because the other folks have stepped down. So I'm new to the committee, but I'm also a teacher in another district. And I just want to say to your point, so many people think that way, and I totally get where they're coming from. But I just want you to think about how the kids that are in kindergarten right now, the jobs that they're gonna have not been invented yet. So we need to try to train these kids to jobs that aren't even made up yet. So how can we do that in the best way? Education is the one industry that has never changed in 100 years. Kids are still sitting in rows in desks as they have been since like education was invented. And we have this opportunity to make our kids, or have our kids have the ability to learn in different ways so that when we go out into the world, like none of us actually work by ourselves anymore at a computer or just like in a little cubicle alone. Like everyone is collaborating. And so this is a way that we can sort of change the way education is in Millis to get those kindergarten kids to be successful in this job that we don't know what they're gonna have yet. And so that's my stance or argument to people that say like, well, it was fine for me, but like, when you were in school, life was different and the jobs were different out there. Like, we don't even know the jobs that the kids are gonna have yet. So we need to have them able to do a million other things, think critically, work in groups, be able to like jump out and think of something else differently with another group of kids or another teacher. And this is a way that we can get them to do that.
I think what you're getting at too, Wayne, is sort of like, it's like a marketing campaign here.
It's messaging.
Right, messaging,
Yeah.
that's a better way to say it. And what I think will resonate with many I think that will resonate with many residents, but it won't resonate with others. What will resonate, I hope, with others is the building is falling down and it's gonna cost us $60 million to fix it. That will resonate with
Keep
people.
it from falling down
So,
to 60
yeah.
million.
So I think it's getting that balance right so you can get the whole swath of voters to kind of buy in here. And they're both hearing, okay, the building's falling down, I don't like the sound of that. We gotta do something about it. And for your parents and others who say our kids, it's a whole new world out there and kids are learning differently. You gotta get that balance right.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to just the financial side I think the key word that goes in there for no more monies than.
But Craig, that's not really accurate.
It is.
No, it isn't really accurate. I mean, look, we talked about 60 million and now it's 80 million. It's gonna cost more to do this project than if we did the renovation. And we're gonna get, let's just say it's 10% more. We're gonna get 100% more value out of it.
Right.
It's gonna be money invested with a great return.
Well, we let Chris quickly go through the design, you guys are a design
Yeah.
group, but he's only got 4
We got-
slides there, and then I'll get back to the MSBA funding, and that's really cost, and we're done.
We didn't invite you here
Here all night.
to let you just go through this.
Your 18th time going through this.
So you
Trying to
kind
get
of,
home before you turn to a pumpkin, so.
you've kind of gathered by now what the big concept here is that we're doing an addition, which is inside of this, pink, magenta colored, dash line. The existing building stops outside of that, or inside of it, so, this is an addition here, that we're proposing could come off. And then the rest of the building is renovated. One of the interesting parts about this is that you get, when you do middle high schools, you kind of want to take advantage of the shared programs in the middle here. And so this actually gets a pretty good adjacency to that, and some of the other options weren't doing that quite as well for us. So you actually get really good shared services, good separation. We're taking over the existing gym and putting media and PE alternatives in there, which are volume spaces. You kind of want some height in there. And so the existing gym is kind of perfect for those. Again, tearing down this portion, and then renovating, right? So that's kind of the general big move. Gym can host the tournaments if we need them to. We go to the second floor. And we stack it straight perfectly here. The one downside currently as drawn is that you would need a second elevator here because the second floors don't connect. But during schematic design, maybe we can investigate a way to solve that. I don't think it's gonna be easy or cheap to do that, and so I also don't think it's necessarily a requirement to do that. So but that's how it's drawn right now. The site plan is, I think, or is it phasing next? I think it's phasing, so site plan. So the site plan looks like this. One of the big advantages that we get out of this site plan is that you can bring cars and buses around. The buses would take the first right and have a dedicated bus drop-off lane, and then they could leave down the way that they leave today, down the backside of Clyde Brown. And then cars could come in and do a drop-off in this zone, and then you've got entry to middle school, entry to high school, kind of right there on the drop-off zone. Parking here, I think we're arriving at around a neutral parking number. And then you've got the addition there. You still would have a main entry. The high school admin is down in this area. middle school admins down in this area, so visitors would likely come to this door during the day, no matter what, but you're also getting a good public entrance over here that goes straight into the gym and right next to the, auditorium and other large spaces that are kind of packed on that end, so it's a good public.
There's also Bob's office too.
District offices are over there as well.
And you consolidated the loading dock as the actual true loading dock of this.
Can you address the portion that will be the swing space?
Oh, yeah, can you go back?
It's on the
It
next
was in
slide.
my head.
Yeah,
We'll
it's
get to
okay.
the next slide.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing I wanna point out here is like the building committee understands we're trying to be as nimbly as possible, so we're not touching, we're doing everything we can not to touch the ball fields, right? And to try and work within the confines of the blacktop and the building itself, so that's another thing we were looking at, so the phasing, yeah.
So the idea here, and one of the benefits of the project is, so one of the things that's excluded from the MSBA's reimbursement is modulars. And so if you do a project that requires temporary facilities, that's kind of all on your dollar. And when they leave, you know, it's like those dollars driving down the road. And so this option allows us to build the addition first, and then you can move students around, like you can move students into it while you renovate a portion, and then move students over there while you then demolish a portion. And so we're showing a strategy that uses existing permanent facilities that you're gonna spend money on anyway as swing space to accomplish the renovation portions as it goes on. And so then you don't have to pay for those extra facilities, over time. But yeah, we're seeing it as about a 27-month project, from shovels in the ground till you complete it. And I think it's a pretty efficient phasing plan from what this great orange part in the middle would be broken up over a series of summers as the project overlaps a couple of years. So you've got a couple summer sections in there that we can do the renovation portions of the middle part. Some of which we're not doing a lot, like the auditorium is not gonna get a ton of work, but maybe some refresher in there, same with cafeteria. But that's how the phasing plan shakes out with.
And the blue area will go.
Yep, and then this last thing we do is this part would disappear and you would adjust the site work, as seen here. Yeah. So,
When we did the 2000 renovation, we had asbestos abatement. I would guess you probably will have more.
Yep.
It was really done by wings where you couldn't close off a classroom or smaller spaces. You really had to close off a section.
Yeah.
And turn that over to the contractor completely, because that was done during the day, during school. Because it couldn't all be done in the summer. I would expect you'd have to do the same here.
So back to cost, so this is just a snippet of the MSBA's cost cap exclusion, so anything that fits into one of these caps, is categorically ineligible. I highlighted in bold the items that affect your project: legal fees, utility back charges, the solar panel back charges, swing space modulars, building permits. You guys pay for your inspection fees like electrical and plumbing, you know, those would be excluded costs. Financing, site remediation, and asbestos containing floor tiles. They do pay for most abatement, just not the floor tiles. And then lastly, district offices are not an eligible item. The MSBA caps out various items, so soft cost caps at 20%, you'll be below that. OPM cap off at 3.5% of $550 a square foot as a metric. They've updated these over the years, so that 550 had gone up last go around. This go around, they updated the two in green, which was the building cost went from 550 to 586. And the site cost went from $55 a square foot to 59. So, you know, essentially, you know, right now, because you're looking at a renovated project, you're getting much closer to that cap. You're at 600 and that math is 645 square foot, and you know, you're below, you're around $700 or below $700 for these renovations, so you're close to it. You know, there's other jobs that you see around the state that are going all electric, that are going all geothermal. That's the cream on the top. The towns are paying all those premiums, right? There's one carrot you can get with a sustainability reimbursement, but other than that, the towns are taking those on their own.
And we would be locked into these costs whenever they.
These get updated annually, so when you file, you get locked in. So any of the jobs that filed in October of last year that got approval in December did not get these two green updates. If you filed in December for a February approval, you did get these updates. So they update it every couple of years periodically, and they won't tell you in advance because they don't want you to play the waiting game, you know, because then that bottlenecks them and their funding flow.
The
So,
good news is they've been updating more frequently at
And they used to.
post-COVID inflation, like, there was a time they got way behind actual market costs. And then post-COVID inflation hit and there was a lot of pressure on them and they've updated these significantly since then. Now, it used to be in the 300s, not that long ago.
your socioeconomic starting point is 53.53% is your baseline reimbursement. You used to get 2 percentage points for just being lead silver. That's now a prerequisite. So now they give you 3 or 4 percentage points, but you have to go, essentially fossil fuel free, all electric buildings, geothermal buildings, you know, to get those percentage points. Between those 4 percentage points and the IRA rebate and mass save, you know, towns are getting substantial dollars back. Unfortunately, the IRA rebate has been frozen with the executive orders of the federal administration, so we don't know what will happen with that. Mass save has been tried and true, although in the news last week, the paper was complaining that, you know, how can we get our utility rates to go down? Well, they realized that about $5 million gets set aside each year to pay rebates back to the users, so that could be attacked as well. So you don't know, but there is a track record of rebates. Back when you got Clyde Brown, Mass Save was paying out, I think we got like $35,000 back. On the job Mike and I just opened in Ashland, they're getting $200,000 back, right? And the jobs that are in design and construction now might get $350. Well, that's why it's at 5 million today, right? The stakes went up dramatically. And so whether that survives or gets reinvented, we don't really know. But at the end of the day, you get percentage points for reimbursement of your building. And then you get percentage points for being a renovation project. It's between 0 and 5%. I pegged you at 2 percentage points from a starting point, you know, because you're saving more than half the building, but some of it are not really renovating, such as the auditorium, so it's a best guess as to where they're gonna land, the state, in terms of how many percentage points they give you. But that means that you're gonna get a 56 to 58 percentage points. Now, that's not your effective rate, because then that's gotta go through the calculator of all these other caps that we just kind of covered there.
So just so I follow, so if say 20% of your cost was over all those caps, you basically would give that a 20% haircut, so 56 would go down to.
The real kicker,
45
the
or
real
something.
nut of it is that, like, if 58% is what you get, and you go back to this slide before, the building costs are 586 a square foot, you're taking 50% of the 586, you're essentially
Yeah.
getting a quarter to 40% reimbursed, is kind of what it ends up being.
Yeah.
Because you guys are staying close to the cap, you're getting the 40%, where other states are getting the quarter, because they're going geothermal and all those little things that are on top. You guys aren't telling you, this is just a disclaimer that these are, I have to make a disclaimer, that these are conceptual costs, because the work of this, you know, the town has not given their full feedback yet. What does the building want to be? Is it brick? Is it not brick? Is it durable finishes for the longevity, or is it simpler finishes that get the first cost down? You know, those are decisions, value decisions the building committee will make about the scope and equipment and fit and finish of that building, which will then get finalized in August, right? Which is before it goes back to the taxpayers. And then, you know, I've tried to give you the best guidance I have, but I'm not have a crystal ball at the MSDA with these renovation projects are harder to predict. And that they own the final say in the reimbursement. But the drum roll here is the, you know, the options that the building committee looked at, the school committee then saw, and the select board saw before they made the determination is this, that we have an estimated, the options are listed on the left side. Estimated construction cost is the first chart there that range from 53 million to 125 million for a new building. The second column there is swing space modulo. So with those pure reno jobs, you're spending about $5 million in renovation modules that are throwaway costs the state won't reimburse. With the smaller ad renos, you were spending about half that, about 2.4 million. With this option, you're using that last wing as your swing space. And then, you know, with the new building, I'd carried costs for, you'd have no athletic fields for a while. So there's rental, there's busing of athletes, there's all that. So in the new build, I did throw a couple $1 million in there. just because I think there's real costs associated the town would have to bear. The soft cost, I show it as a percentage there. It's not an arbitrary percentage. I did do backups for all these items. Obviously with the smaller jobs, you're a little more top heavy with soft costs, so they're 33%. When you get to the bigger jobs like the AR4A and the new construction, that gets back down to 30%. We're gonna squeeze that down, so I'm not saying it's a 30% now, I'm saying it's 30% today. The building committee will make a decision in August. Like another thing in the news today, tariffs, right? You'll make a gut check. Do I wanna carry an extra $1 million because of whatever other crazy stuff will come down the road? Or do I wanna plan for the next pandemic, or do I wanna go lean and have to go back to the taxpayers should you need it? Those are gut checks that you'll do, this fall. And so that 30% could be, 29, it could be 31, those are decisions the committee will make at that point. Effective reimbursement rate, as I noted with the repairs, those early ad renos, that's that $4 million for the kind of windows and boilers there and roofs that I think you get. You're kind of not meeting the essence of the program you applied to if you're doing those basic repairs only. With R3, you're upgrading the science facilities, you still haven't met the need for additional students, so that's a conversation with the state, but I did project you'd get more money there, maybe $24 million in reimbursement. But all the ad renos and the new construction, I think you'd get, back in the range of what you'd want to do, which is, mid-30s to maybe even mid-40s, depending on which option you pick. The new construction caps out because the state's not paying for turf fields, they're not paying for the bathrooms for those fields, they're not paying for all those swing space. So, that one starts to pull back down to earth. So the ad renos this town would likely maximize the reimbursement for the state. You're keeping that dollars per square foot low. You're not going above and beyond the program. So that's why you're in the low 40s there in a couple of those ad renos. So what that means, from a net standpoint is on the right-hand green column, is that when you look at the green ad renos, you could be getting back the impact to the town after reimbursement could be on the lower ad reno AR5 or 6 could be high 60s, low 70s net impact to the town. And AR4A could be low 70s to low $80 million to the town. And in the new construction, it was 104 to 112 and climbing, depending on how you finished out that athletic field and was it turf and all the things that would go with that. They would only, go higher. So I know that's kind of a lot to digest, but that was kind of how we presented it and, what we think the best guess is how that. And so it's really a value proposition. And I think, when you look at the ad renos or even the pure reno R3, you're in that kind of low 70 million range anyway. And so to go to the 80 million and to get more space and to have a building that will last longer and have more flexibility, it seemed to the committees, the 3 committees in town, that was a worthwhile value proposition to bring back to the voters. And then before I open up the questions, just kind of a summary on that. Our option is AR4A. It's $98.2 million currently in terms of construction dollars. That number will go up and down based on the decisions of the committee. $127 million total project cost. That number will get finalized by the summer of this year to go back to the taxpayers in the fall. And this is just the dates there, and that's the end of the presentation.
What year is 98.2? What?
Escalated out to two years. So we're assuming that the project would get funded in fall of this year. And we would take a year worth of design essentially. So we would bid it fall of 26 to break ground in winter of 26 into 27. So essentially break ground in kind of January timeframe. And so we're projecting out to 27 with escalation.
If you check your emails, you'll see the presentation.
Yeah, we emailed this to hopefully you guys, hopefully that link worked for you.
That's good.
And every presentation we made to the committee is up there on the project website. We can put that up there as well. But the key dates here are basically we've submitted, the building committee after collecting the votes submitted on February 27th. Our next, we have an interim meeting with the state in March 12th, and then their board then takes it up on April 30th. That green lights the project to move forward. But after our meeting in March, we're gonna get going on schematic design. So it'll take March through July to finish that design. And then in August, we'll debate cost again. And then bring that to the voters. The state will approve it in October and you guys will approve it likely in November or December or January, whenever you guys hold your ballots. Right, that's it for our formal presentation. We can go back to talk about anything and everything.
What, just as a bit of a formality for our committee, so just, so I think we all would agree, but we are assessing AR4A. That is the proposal in front of us. We're not really, our job is not to debate the AR3 or thing, right? Yeah, just want to make sure all.
AR4A versus not.
Versus the fix it as you go, yeah.
Well, it's
And I
like the
think
other
the other-
projects we've done, the committee, the department head, whoever brings to us their proposal.
Yeah.
This is the proposal.
Yes.
And I think the other piece is, this isn't to be scored for this town meeting. Because we don't have final numbers or anything else on it, we have estimates, and it's not being voted at this town meeting. So I think the important part is first to come up with a number to put in our report, we're carrying 90 million. I think no matter how you slice it, that might be high. You know, so that's the first thing that I think we have to look at pretty hard too, what's the number to carry?
Yeah.
You also need to careful on messaging with that too, because messaging is important at all levels of every project,
Yeah.
but you'll vote 127 million because you're required to bond the entirety of the job. The MSBA will pay you as you go through. You'll never borrow that. You know, every month you'll get a check back. For every invoice you pay, there's a 30 to 60 day lag and you get that money back. And so that will continue. And, you know, I'll work with Jen Scannell on the borrowing, you know, as we go through, but that number, that scary 127 number will be out there. That's important to message.
And we've been pretty clear on our select board meetings, and I think if it wasn't for the MSBA funding, we'd be right there at that $80 million fix it. You know, it's the fact that there is the option for a 40% grant on this, that makes it, you know, R4A, attractive.
One question, maybe this is, so the original, the earlier part, we said 60 million to do the ad hoc fixes over the next 10 years, and you have the 5 buckets, there are 4 buckets. Why wouldn't that just be the 76? Like, why wouldn't it kind of just be the same as just renovating? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
so-
all sort of the same stuff. really.
Yeah, so the 60 becomes the 76 because we're carrying the $5 million in modulars. You know, we may have some modulars in the swing space with the 10-year capital plan. We didn't draw it out in terms of how we would get it to the high level, but how do you go across the building? Can we get it all in one summer? Can we not? You know, what's the pain level? I guess is one way
Yeah.
to kind of consider it. So, you know, that's partly why there's a range on the
Okay, so that's
10-year
the 10
plan.
million you were talking about.
But so that was, of the 76, that's, you know, it's 5 million of it. And the other 10 million is really the kind of stitching it together aspect of like
Yeah.
making sure you're proud of the finished product and it doesn't
Right.
look like a Frankenstein with, it's, you know, it's all stitched together. So that kind of makes up us projecting how we would fill it out. But you could do the 76, you could do less than the 76 million, you're just understanding that everything doesn't necessarily match.
Yeah.
Or you're getting by with less modulars, or you're picking lower finishes, or, you know, you're roofing, you know, you have levels of roofing you pick, you have levels of finish you can pick, all these things. There's always ways you can squeeze it down. But like anything, if you pay for the higher grade, it generally lasts a little bit longer unless it's a newfangled
Yeah,
cutting
I
edge
guess
thing
that's
where
maybe
you're
a
paying for something that
Point
should.
for us to think about too is, let's just say it's 60 to do the ad hoc, but it's more after that because whatever, the sort of patchwork fix of the ceiling tiles might need to be revisited in 10 years again, right? So whereas you know, this should
And
last
the,
a
and the
lot
60 is
longer.
a range, like you can squeeze it down, but you also run the, you know, we made
I wanna
assumptions on
squeeze
what's
60
crumbling and
out.
what's not, right? What's,
Yeah,
Well, I think the reality is, I don't think anybody in the room wants to go out 5 times for 5 overrides.
right.
I just think,
voter
and once
fatigue is a
you,
real thing.
and once you run off that schedule, you're off that schedule, and then that's gonna really mess with your costs. So the way I looked at it was the R1 versus AR4 versus new building. Those were the 3 that really popped out there as the ones that were listening to the committee that were the most likely scenarios.
Couldn't we,
And if it wasn't for the 40%, I'd be at R1. I was at R1 for a very long
but
time.
the new building is really something that the MSBA requires us to put in. We never
yeah.
really thought that was the right solution.
No, we didn't do a deep dive, we didn't really program it out, we made sure it fit the components
Yeah.
that you would need, but at the end of the day, you know, even back on Clyde Brown, you know, talking about field replacement, there's always a lightning rod in this town, so we did not go down the path of replicating fields and turf fields and stadiums and things like that.
If you think of this chart and you look at it from two factors, cost and program. The top is the cheapest cost. The bottom is the best solution programmatically. And then in between, you're sort of fading out cost and fading out program. AR Forest, rose to the top because it solved the majority of the program while still keeping costs within reason. It was kind of a good blend.
Yeah.
That's why it.
I would suggest, though, that there's another way of looking at it. It's not just the straight cost as you presented. There's a cost for the fact that if you do the least expensive option, you're only buying maybe 15, maybe 20 years.
Right.
So you're still going to have major costs coming. And that has to be factored in whatever the solution is. So there is a hidden cost that you're going to take as a big hit in the not too distant future, as opposed to taking a much smaller cost hit differential right now.
That's really hard to project.
Well,
And
the
that's,
amount is.
you're absolutely right conceptually. It's really hard for us to project, even a few years down the road these days, even a few months right now, we're in that kind of market. So it's hard to really project like 20 years out. But you're right, the decision you make on these options, impacts when you have to revisit this building. Is it gonna be 20 years from now, like you said, if you're just doing an R1? Or is it, 50 years from now if you're doing a new building?
I think the point is that in the, get into the messaging again, we just want to be careful of having it be, it's 80 versus 60. Because that is not a fair comparison. That is, there are apples and pineapples, right? They're. So, but people glom onto that. It's $20 million. That's a lot of money. Why are we spending $20 million, right? So I think we just have to figure out the right message so that that's very, very clear to the voter that, what's being compared here.
And on the messaging, right? So I think you explained this, but the project cost markup, the percentages has to do with what is that briefly? Because what I know the reason I'm asking is because I can see someone looking at it and saying, well, they're trying to make the plan that we're choosing look like it's got a lower markup than the upper one. When I'm assuming it's because you have to. Well, I'll let you.
Yeah. So I could put numbers in that too, if that plays better with the.
Oh, no, I do.
No, because the comment did come up on our committee. I know several of us commented on it, because it's not. Markup is not the right word. I did a soft cost budget for each of these, so it's your design fees, it's your consultant fees, it's testing and inspection, it's your contingency, which is your biggest item. On a renovation project, we're carrying 7.5% of change order contingency, so the unknowns you run into. And then I carried another 2 percentage points for soft costing, so there's 10% of that 30 is just contingencies right now, because it's the what ifs that are out there. And the other 20% is your furniture, your technology, consultant fees, not borrowing costs, but our insurances.
I think it'd be very helpful to have a breakdown on that, because I've had a heated argument with people who think that you two guys are making $127 million. And it's not.
Well, I wish. That would help my tuition.
So please break it out as best you can with.
I could flip the
OPM
percentage
costs
for the numbers.
And it doesn't have to be on this chart. It can just be a side piece that we describe it,
There are a lot of people in town that want to do just the reno because they think it's less expensive.
Right.
And then there are the parents of kids in Clyde Brown and in the middle high school that want to do the right thing.
Well, I
So
think
we're-
it comes down to, I'm with
We're
you.
trying to figure out how to approach them.
Putting
It's hard.
aside the $60 million, patch it up option. The 72 million, if you just take 40% of this, because there's a range there, that's, 76 million. So it's really a $4 million difference.
It's not much.
So I'm getting $127 million of value for $80 million, there's $76 million if it's 40%.
And peace of mind for longer term.
And it's gonna last me 50 years,
Right.
not
Beyond
20
that,
years.
that R1 doesn't do anything with program or overtime. Zero.
Well, there's two different audiences, and there's an audience that cares very much about
The
the
cost.
there's three audiences. There's one that cares very much about what we're doing to help the children, another group that cares very much about how much it costs, and if there is no significant, and $4 million on this project isn't significant.
Correct.
And then there's a third group that honestly, and it's been said, I've got text, because I'm unfortunately accessible, who don't think we have to do anything. I was told, let it fall down, we'll just send them to Tri-County. And I said, that's 30,000 per child per year, and they won't take everybody, so that's not an option. Yeah.
There go your property values.
You know, I think it's important though, because when you guys presented to select board, you guys voted for the AR4A. And as we communicate as a capital planning and just to the voters, it's that option. It's not evaluating all the other options here.
There is no other option. out
Correct.
there.
But in this conversation, what's great though is understanding
Yeah.
the renovation aspects and the costs associated with it, so can we explain why AR4A was selected? I think that's important though, because we're like, well, I want R2, I want R3. It's like,
Yeah,
that's not
exactly.
we're past that point.
Well, we're past
Messaging is
that
very, very critical. I mean, you know, the projects these days are more subject to failure, right? Because there are people that don't wanna spend that number, or they can't keep up with the cost of inflation, and, you know, those are all real problems and challenges, and you see the articles in the Globe. You know, it's important that the building committee and all the committees in town kind of spend time educating the people, so.
Yeah.
You know, we wanna do that early, like, in years past, you would wait for August and have the whole full number baked in, you just kind of do the 6 weeks running up to town meeting, and that's good.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore, like, you
Yeah.
really need to spend time, so those people can be invited in now, say, if you got a voice, don't text Craig, show up to the meeting, right?
That's usually my second line in it.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
challenge.
we have a group.
Yeah.
And we're meeting for the third time this week. They're all parents. Aren't they? I thought so.
Yeah. Well-
And they're just getting started, and they're starting to ask the question, why not the reno? Why this? Why that?
Yeah.
So this is good information.
Yeah, and I think for our committee and on the presumption that we rank this as a high priority for the town, so I don't want to presume X, we haven't gone through that process yet, but I think, you know, we have a role where we can help with that messaging and make sure it's consistent and, you know, we're saying the same things here as we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, we don't face the issue of, well, the fire chief wants a really big truck, why don't we get a small?
Right.
We don't do that.
Right.
Right.
He asks for the truck that he thinks we need. I think from the, of course, I'm on both committees, so, but I think this committee, and I agree with you, John, we've been asked to not evaluate, to comment on and to include in our report, AR
Yep.
4A,
Yeah, great.
not what else.
Mhm.
This is what the town leadership
Yeah.
has asked us to evaluate.
It's AR4A versus doing.
Now, the other committees may have to deal with the
Voting
reno
process
versus this,
down,
but
and then
that's
what
not
are-
really our job.
Yeah.
I don't think.
So if we don't get funding, for AR4A, when would the next time be, that we realistically be, eligible to apply to the MSBA again? Or not just to apply, but
I can speak from experience on this one. I'm the chair of the building committee in Medfield. We had a project that was voted down, in 2020. We've just been invited back in 2025, so there's no rhyme or reason as to when you get invited back, but I would safely assume 4 years would be a minimum. 4 to 5 is probably, there are other towns that have had no votes and people have come back, including, Lynn Pickering Middle School, which is back in the program. Now the estimates for that project are up 40% from, 4 years ago. So
but
there's
for,
implications to kicking the can down the road that people should be aware of. Obviously, these are challenging times from an inflationary perspective,
but 4 to 5 years plus 3 years for all the front end stuff that we're
Vote
doing.
in,
now.
and invite in and come back with a
And-
new proposal, so yeah, it's
And
a
the-
6+ year delay.
And then you don't get reimbursed for the feasibility study on that second. If you get a no vote, they've reimbursed you for this feasibility
Yeah.
study. You don't get reimbursed for a second one. So, I mean,
Or
it's
any
small
work
in
that
the
we
grand
put
scheme of
into
things.
the school in the interim.
And that is
Right,
really
right,
what
yeah,
we have to look at is you're not gonna kick it down the road and not do some of the HVAC, the roofing and so on. So we're gonna pay for that whether we like it or not. That's a given.
I don't know, I think the buckets along the corridor are kind of nice, aren't they?
I don't know if you saw that was in the news this, I forget what
It
school
was
it was.
Milford.
Milford, all over the school. there's
The water
buckets.
features,
Yeah.
it adds aesthetics to the school.
Snow melting off the roof
Yeah.
over vacation, we had, 3 tiles fell down in our office.
So,
That's okay, you got replacements.
Maybe it'll kill the bees.
Yeah. So maybe, don't wanna keep here all night, you've already been here, any other questions? Well, we've got everybody here.
Appreciate the
Yeah,
information.
thank you.
Any
Really-
any follow-ups you guys need, obviously, they should flow through the building committee, but, Jim can be your liaison.
Yeah.
I'd like to have one more presentation, please.
Yeah, I mean, we probably will wanna regroup in whenever in the summer at some point, once those numbers are a little bit closer to reality, right? Right, cool, okay,
Can I
great.
just say one,
Yeah.
I mean, we've submitted this thing, right?
PSR
on
minutes.
Thursday, yeah.
Is there a cover sheet or something that we could get as our committee said we submitted it and it's 120, whatever the number is and we're waiting? I don't, just something for us to, because we have 2 forms we get for all projects, the Form 7 and an evaluation form.
Right. To show the voters.
Or a one-liner.
This is what was
or two-liner.
submitted.
This is what was submitted, this is what we are telling you about.
Yeah, but we're not going to
Basically, like
score
this
this
email,
time,
like,
correct?
this is-
No.
Just one quick question for
There's
the.
a line in our
yeah,
report.
Right,
Yeah.
for this, right now, this cost is
Right,
127.
127, estimated construction 98.
But that's going to be subject to more design,
Correct.
finishes and stuff, so it could go up or
Yeah.
probably, hopefully, I'm gonna urge down. But that's a number that,
That's the number we're.
barring any surprises with tariffs and other things, but just on design stuff.
That's the number that we should have in August.
Yeah.
and Early September.
So I just was making sure that that's not the final number and that's not baked.
It won't
And then-
it won't be the final number that you vote on.
Right, and then the next piece is, when do we hear from the reimbursement rate from the MSBA? Is that like
That'll be part
September?
of that fall,
Okay.
August.
That's fine, I'm just trying to get an
Formally,
idea of the timing of it.
Yeah, I mean, formally, their board vote here on August 29th is when they'll give you the final deal. But the 3rd week of September, I'll be negotiating for them on your guys' behalf, trying to get as much as I can squeeze out of the stone, it's all know. Kind of what the number is, but they'll formally take action on the 29th. So we can socialize kind of with ranges, but it was pretty tight at that point.
Yeah.
What we have, I'll have a good estimate in August, kind of when I submit, but I won't have their final comments. They're gonna give us comments on the package it's in now, which may say, we'll cover all these rooms, but this one particular room, that one's not covered, right? And so we can then decide, do we really need that one room? Bob, can you live without that one room? If so, we take it out. If not, we keep it in. And so those types of conversations will happen.
But I hope we can live without it. All right.
Be happy it's not the Revere budget.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, guys. I guess just as a formality, if somebody else make a motion to close our meeting, or move we adjourn.
I'll make the motion to, okay, second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the capital planning meeting, so